Good morning. Daf Yomi for the month is sponsored by Michael Tsaidi for Atzlach with making Aliyah and in honor of his late father Zohar ben Ruvain Zichron Levracha. And Daf Yomi for the month is sponsored by Moshe and Susie Feder Lili Nishmas, Mr. Feder's father, Aryeh ben Michal, whose yahrzeit was on the 15th of Elul, and Lili Nishmas, Mrs. Feder's mother, Rosa Basimcha Cohen, whose yahrzeit was on the 18th of Elul. May the Neshamos have an Aliyah. We got to straighten our faces because before the camera comes on, that's where all the excitement happens, right? So if you're missing live Daf Yomi, you missed the preamble of the shiur. We are at the Mishnah on Yud Gimel Amid Aleph 13a, A1 I would presume in the art scroll towards the top of the Daf Mishnah, which is great. Start from a Mishnah. HaPesach ve'achatos sheshachton shelo lishman. If it's Korban Pesach that you're doing, Korban Chatos that you're doing, and you do the Shechita shelo lishma, as we said in the first Mishnah, then that's going to invalidate the offering. But this Mishnah is going to add on. Also, kibel, if you catch the blood, veholech, or you walk with the blood towards the mizbeach, vizorak, or you sprinkle the blood. Shelo lishman, you do any of those things, shelo lishma. O, lishman v'shelo lishman, or if you have intent, proper intent, and not proper intent. This we already understood, because we talked about this in Daf Beis Beis when we quoted this Mishnah. We said that means that you started the service thinking that you were doing it right, and then in the middle, you said, I changed my mind. I'm going to do it wrong. And you switch in the middle. Oh, the other way around. Or shelo lishman v'lishman. You start off with the wrong intent, and then you go into the right intent. Either way, as long as part of the service has the wrong intent, it invalidates it. Psulin, those are offerings that are not valid. Ketzad lishman v'shelo lishman. What does this mean? As we've been describing. L'shem Pesach l'shem shlamim. Person starts slaughtering his Korban Pesach. And we're on the day of Erev Pesach, and he starts off with the right intent. He says it's going to be a Pesach, and then later in the middle he goes, shlamim. Then how is shelo lishman ulishman? How do you do it shelo lishma? You start off with the wrong intent, you switch to the right intent. Exactly the opposite. L'shem shlamim, you start off with the shlamim, the wrong thing. L'shem Pesach, then you decide I'll switch it back to the Pesach. Shehazevach nifsal barba dvarim. There are 4 parts to the service. This is what's great is at this point, 12 pages in to the Masechta, none of this is shocking or new. 4 parts to the service, right? B'shchita, b'kibul, b'hiluch, b'zrika, slaughtering, catching the blood, bringing the blood to the mizbeach, and sprinkling the blood. Rabbi Shimon machshir behiluch. Rabbi Shimon says, walking the blood to the mizbeach, that's not going to invalidate your offering if you do that not with the right intent. Why? Shahai Omer, because he said, efshar shelo b'shchita, you can't do a korban without slaughtering it. V'shelo b'kabbalah, you can't do a korban without catching the blood. V'shelo b'zrika, you can't do a korban without sprinkling the blood. Aval, I forgot my Beis HaMikdash. I was going to bring my Beis HaMikdash. Okay. Aval, however, we'll draw some pictures. Aval efshar belo hiluch, but you can do it without walking the mizbeach. You don't have to bring the blood close. Because, for example, shochet betzad mizbeach v'zorek, I'm going to draw my Beis HaMikdash because I needed it today. I was thinking to myself, I'm going to bring my Beis HaMikdash, and I didn't bring my Beis HaMikdash. Okay. Overhead view. This is the Ulam. Okay. This is the Heichal, the Beis HaMikdash. These are the front doors, right? Then you've got a big courtyard here. We're going to be only worrying about this first courtyard here. Okay. You've got a Mizbeach right here. Okay.
Is that copper?
This is not copper. It was copper during the times of the Mishkan, not copper. It's made out of stone during the times of the Beis HaMikdash. Okay? It's a good question. So, here's your Mizbeach overhead view. Okay? And this is, we call this the Beis HaShchita. There were these rings that were here that held the animals down. We're not going to draw those in all these kind of places.
The Beis HaShchita is where the animal got shechted, right?
Yes, that's correct, because it's the north side of the Mizbeach. Let's draw our directions. North, south, right, west, and east.
Okay.
That's the reason I draw them that way, because that way we'll get confused. We think north, we think up, right? But it is not. North is this way, west is this way. Also, we think east is towards the Beis HaMikdash, right? Yes, except if you're in the Beis HaMikdash, east is the front door is that way, right? West is going to be towards the Beis HaMikdash.
Okay. This is in the west of Israel, so it's not.
So you always got to face. So these are our cardinal directions, and this is where our Beis HaMikdash is. Okay, so now if you shechted your korban, right over here, then you don't have to do any holacha at all. You just turn around and throw it right on the Mizbeach. It's right there.
Yeah.
Right? That's Reb Shimon's point. So if it's not needed, how could thinking about the wrong avoda, how could thinking about the wrong thing while you're doing it ruin it? You could shecht right next to the Mizbeach and you're fine.
You don't have sikadas.
Well, the question is, because Hesech Hadas ruins anything? Does it? You don't need to worry about Hesech Hadas because you don't even need to have the same Kohen doing all four of the avodos.
Because you can pass it on.
You could pass it along, right? Yeah. One Kohen could do the Shrita. We don't even need a Kohen for Shrita, we'll see. But one Kohen could do the Kabbalah, hand it to another Kohen who brings it close to his back. Another Kohen can sprinkle it. You don't have to worry about that. Okay? It's only wrong intent during the avoda that ruins it. And so he says, since halacha is not really an avoda that you need, it's not always critical, right? So therefore, his opinion is, if I have the wrong intent while I'm doing that, it can't ruin the avoda in the circumstance where I'm doing it, right? Because if you did your shechita way out here, then you do have to bring to a halacha. He says it's not going to invalidate it. Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi Eliezer says, "Hamahalich b'makom shu tzorich lahalech." If you're doing a walking in a circumstance where you need to walk, machshava poselis, then the sprinkling is then thinking about the wrong avodah is going to ruin it. Now, we're going to explain what he means later on when we see his opinion, so we don't have to worry about it much at this point right now. If you're a circumstance where you don't need to bring that blood, so then, ein machshava poselis, then the thought is not going to ruin it. Okay? Says the Gemara.
Did you get the Rabbi Shimon Machshir B'Hulu? Did I miss that?
Rabbi Shimon is...
Did you get that?
Machshir, it's a good question. I sometimes skip things. Rabbi Shimon Machshir B'Hiluch. Yes. I did say that because Rabbi Shimon says that you don't have to worry about wrong intent when you're carrying it, right? Well, somebody rewind and see if I'm right. B'Hiluch Shehaya, because he used to say, you can do without the others, can't do without the halacha. Okay, says the Gemara. The Kabbalah mi pasla. Okay, catching the blood, is that really a service that if you think in the wrong intention, it's going to ruin the korban? V'hatanya, we have a brisa that says not like that. V'hikrivo, the pasuk says, you shall bring it close. Zu kabbalah sadam. That means that there is an avoda of catching blood of the shchita into a service utensil. So atamar kabbalah sadam, you think that the word hikriv means to catch the blood. Oeno ala zrika. Bringing close, maybe that sounds like sprinkling the blood. That's actually bringing it close to the mizbeach. How do you understand that the word v'hikriv means to catch blood in a utensil? So the answer is Kishomer. There's another pasuk. The Kishomer says v'zarku. You're supposed to sprinkle the blood. Harei zrika. That pasuk is talking about sprinkling the blood. So harei zrika amar. Ha mani mekayim v'hikrivu. So how are you going to understand v'hikrivu to bring the blood close? Zu kabbalah sadam is talking about that pasuk is referring to catching the blood. So b'nei Aaron hakohanim pasuk says who does that part of the service? The children of Aaron the kohanim. Shetehei b'kohen kosher. That means that catching the blood has to be done with a kosher, valid kohen, right? Ubekli shares. You need to have a properly designated Beis Hamikdash authorized service utensil, right? Can't bring your own stuff, okay? And that is how it is done, okay? So that indicates, okay, now, Amar Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva says about this, how do I know that catching the blood has to be with a kohen, a kosher kohen, and with a kosher service utensil? Shenam Markan, because the pasuk says over here, right? Over here is a pasuk by catching the blood. Bnei Aaron, they're the children of Aaron have to do it. V'nemar lehalon, and then it says over talking about the list of the kohanim that were anointed and were appointed to be service kohanim. Eilish shmos bnei Aaron kohanim. Ha-mishuchim. These are the ones that are the children of Aaron who were anointed as kohanim. Ma lahalon bekohen kosher ubekli shares. Just like over there when it's listing off Aaron and the kohanim, it's telling you who were Aaron and his sons who are the kosher valid kohanim. So afkan. So here too, when it says the word bakohen, it's bekohen kosher ubekli shares. It's with a kohen. It's presumed always to mean whenever you just say kohen, presume it now means that it has to be a kosher kohen who has no blemishes. It's a kosher kohen who is of the right family lineage. He doesn't have any problems with his kuna and with a service utensil. Amari Tarfon. Rabbi Tarfon says, Ekpach es benai. None of this is our problem yet. The problem's coming up. Ekpach es benai imlo shamati lahavchin hefresh ben kabbalah lezrika. He says, I will cut off my children if it's not true, meaning he's swearing on the lives of his kids. He knows it's true that there is some halachic difference between catching the blood and sprinkling the blood.
Why is threatening? Why
He's not threatening his kids.
Why
Yeah,
is
it's a good-
children, for example?
Because people, when they mean right, cross my heart, right? People say when they want to say they mean it, right? And especially when you're frustrated and you can't remember something, right? You take
You use your wife. If you use your wife instead.
you could do anything, right? I guess he liked his kids. He was going to try to be able to point out that this was very important
For
to
his
him.
wife then.
Okay, so now the Ein Li Lefarish, I cannot remember. I can't explain it. I cannot remember what the difference is. Couldn't Rabbi Tarfon. So I'm Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was one of Rabbi Tarfon's students, and Rabbi Akiva says, "Ani Afarish." I'll explain what it is. Now it seems like Rabbi Akiva figured it out. On whether he had remembered Rabbi Tarfon had taught it to him in the first place. Could be possibly either way. Kabbalah lo asa b'machshava k'maseh. Catching the blood, they didn't make wrong intention the same as a wrong action. Okay, what does that mean? Wrong intention, you can invalidate a service which is zrika also b'machshava k'maseh. You can sprinkle the blood with the wrong intent, and that will ruin the zrika, just like if I took the blood and I sprinkled it on the floor, right? A bad action ruins the blood, so does a bad intention. But that is not true when it comes to Kabbalah catching the blood. Now, that's where we have a problem. Because our Mishnah just said that if I have intention for the wrong korban by Kabbalah, it does ruin it. So now he's suggesting that it doesn't. So that's going to be our challenge, right? Highlighted in this whole brisa. That's where the challenge is going to come from. Kiblu bachutz. Second difference is that there's no source in the Torah that if you do Kabbalah, if the person who's doing Kabbalah catching the blood is outside of the Azar, outside of the area of the base of English, let's say he's like here and he's sticking his arms inside catching the blood, so that will not make you chayav kares. There's no problem of kares for catching blood being outside. Not right, but right. But it's not going to bring you. It's not going to be an avera that you'd get kares for.
Projecting gets 5 cars.
Shchita does, and zrika does. Zarku bachutz, that zrika does. Onish kares, you get kares by doing avoda outside the base of Mikdash.
So it's a different person doing each avoda.
Yes, could be. Doesn't have to be, but yes, certainly could be. I'm imagining on slow days, you walked up, you found a coin. Hey, are you busy? Can you help me out? And he would help you out. I'm imagining on busy days, they had a service, right? Like, next one up, pass to the next guy.
Everybody has to have the same kavanah. It means if I have it for shchita and somebody doesn't have it for zrika, it's
Everybody should know what the offering is, yeah. Because if I do my zrika, if one guy, because you could imagine, one guy, this guy's bringing his korban shlamim. One guy caught the blood for the shlamim because he's standing right there. Hands it off to another kohen. He brings it to the mizbeach. Hands it to a third kohen. He's standing there. He has no idea what this blood is.
You have to do the Kabbalah like the.
You have to be able to make sure there's good communication.
You have to do it right with the shechita is.
Right? I'm sure that's like what you tell the kids in hockey, whatever. Communicate. Make sure everybody understands what they're doing here, where they're supposed to be standing, what their service is, right?
No, because I remember reading a Mishnah that talked about like the Pesach offering, that it looked like silver, lightning, how fast they would
Yeah, they're moving.
the blood. But we were saying before that you also have it in terms of the Baal, the person in mind. It's not only the
Yeah, so for the Korban
how do you
Pesach,
do that with that kind
if
of
you
speed of,
you don't, remember we said that no intention
right.
doesn't ruin it.
Right.
So if I don't know who the owner is, that's not going to ruin my korban. And then everybody knows every single one of these bloods that are being passed to me is a korban pesach.
Because it's at the time.
Correct. Everybody knows this is the korban pesach we're doing here, right? Also, keep in mind that we said the korban pesach was supposed to be done later on in the day. Otherwise, other offerings were never done after the korban mincha.
After plug or whatever it was.
So yeah, that's correct. So therefore, everything was a korban pesach at that time of day. Okay. Now, kablu psulin ein chayavin alav. If somebody who is puzzle for kahuna, if they catch the blood, so they are not chayiv misa for doing so, right? It has to be done by a kohen. Zarku psulin chayavin alav. But if you sprinkle the blood, so that's his differences. Okay. Amar Rabbi Tarfon, Rabbi Tarfon's sister Rabbi Akiva. Avoda im hitisa yaminu small. I swear by the service of the base of Mikdash. She's into swearing by things. I swear by the service of the base of Mikdash. You did not veer left or right. That is exactly one point. Now that you reminded me, those are exactly the reasons. Okay. Ani shemati ve'en li lefarsh. That's exactly, I couldn't. Ve'anata doresh umaskim lishmua. Belashon hazeh. You figured it out. You made a drasha. You figured out exactly what the rules were. Thank you, Rabbi Akiva. That was great. Okay, end of story. Amar lo sorry, not yet. Amar lo Akiva. Kol porish mimcha k'porish mechayav. He said one more thing. He said, Rabbi Akiva, anybody who separates from you is like somebody separating from life. Right? This is your amazing Rabbi Akiva. Okay. Now, end of brisa. So, problem is, our Mishnah says, wrong intent by Kabbalah, by catching the blood, invalidates it. This brisa, Rabbi Akiva said, wrong intent by Kabbalah does not invalidate it. So Amar Rava, Rava says, lo kasha, not a contradiction. Kan b'machsheves pigul, kan b'machsheves shalo lishma, different types of malintent. Right? That's a good word, malintent. Right? One type of wrong intent is changing it from one sacrifice to the other. That's what our Mishnah is talking about. You do the Kabbalah, you catch it, and you think this shlamim is going to be a chatos, then that could invalidate, right? Well, we're actually in our Mishnah talking about a chatos and a pesach to make it actually completely invalid. I catch this pesach and I think it's going to be a shlamim. That ruins it. It is now puzzle. Okay? So, that's one type. The other type is pigul. Pigul is specifically when you do the service thinking that the consumption of this blood or meat or fats is going to be done outside of the proper time, right? So that's a very specific type. Then you get curries for that. It's a very serious type of wrong intent. Says Rabbi Akiva, if you think of pigul while you're doing Kabbalah, if you think I'm doing this Kabbalah and I'm going to eat this meat 3 days from now, that's not pigul. It's not pigul, does not ruin and is not invalidated at Kabbalah. But you can ruin your korban if you think that this chatos is a shlamim at Kabbalah. Okay? Daika nami dikatani. You can also see that if you read our Mishnah more carefully. Our Mishnah says shazevach nivsal. Our Mishnah says that a korban becomes puzzle by this bad intent. Velokatani mispagel. It doesn't say that in our Mishnah. It's not talking about pigul. It's not saying that the korban becomes pigul. That's a different problem. Shma mina. So that's clear. Okay, our Mishnah is talking about a different thing than Rabbi Akiva is talking about. Machshavas pigul lo pasla bekabbalah. 1 second. So what you're saying is that Rabbi Akiva says that if Kabbalah is done with the pigul intent, then that's not pigul. But v'hatanya, we have a brisa that seems to imply otherwise. You might have thought that since Zrika is the kapara, that's where the atonement actually takes place. Maybe wrong intent only is a problem when it comes to the sprinkling. Minayin lirabos shchita ve'kabbalah. How do I know that wrong intent is also a problem by slaughtering or also by catching the blood? Talmud Lomar, the pasuk says, and this is the puzzle of pigul, ve'im hayachol ye'achel, if you will consume it, and the pasuk continues on the third day. If you have having in mind, now we know that the pasuk can't be talking about actually consuming it because that is a prohibition of nosar. That's not a avera that receives kares for it. Therefore, we interpreted this pasuk to be talking about thinking about eating it in the third day. Hayachol ye'achel, and when hayachol ye'achel means double language, that any type of consumption. Pigul intent has to be, we had this conversation and I got myself a little confused. We had this conversation about a week or so ago. If somebody does shchita having in mind they're going to do zrika at the wrong time, that's not pigul, right? That's not pigul. Doing shchita having in mind that the blood will be poured into the mizbeach, or the fats will be burned on the mizbeach. Consumption services, those are the pigul ones. Those are the ones you have to worry about, not the other blood services. Okay, so that's not pigul. So therefore, this tells me mibasar zevach shlama, right? If you are eating or consuming from the flesh of the korban shlamim, lo yeratzeh, it's pigul and it will not be acceptable, right? So bidvarm hamevin lidei achila hakasav medaber. So that means that in order for it to be a pigul problem, it has to be a consumed service, consumption, right? One of those end consumption services. Yochel shani mar be'af shvichas shiraim v'aktaras emurim. So I might have thought that also, if you are pouring the blood out, or you are burning the fats, if I do those with the intent to eat it, consume it beyond the proper time, that would also be pigul. Talmud Lomar, therefore it says, Bayom hashlishi lo yeratzeh. hamakrivoso. Hamakrivoso. On the third day will not be desired the one who offers it as a sacrifice, meaning that it is only lo yechashev. So zrika bichlal haisa v'lama yatzasa. So I'm sorry, that's the next part, right? So therefore, it has to be part of the sacrificial services in order for it to be for the thought to be invalidating, it has to be one of the sacrificial services. So therefore, this pasuk is telling, in order for it to be pigul, two things we now know. Number one, has to be one of the four blood services. Number two, it has to be, well, we're going to see it's only three blood services because not Kabbalah, but that can be where the question is, right? It has to be one of the blood services, and it has to be thought about one of the consumption services. Okay, so that's the definition of pigul. If you mess that up, it's not pigul. Okay, so zrika bichlal haisa. So that means one, you included all of the blood services. Sprinkling the blood is a blood service. I don't need the pasuk to specify afterwards. Also, don't sprinkle it with the wrong intent. Velama yatzasa. So why does the pasuk nevertheless go out of its way and mention don't sprinkle the blood for the wrong intent? So the answer is lahakesh leha. In order to make a comparison, lo marlach, to tell you, mazrika miyuchedes shehi avoda umeakeves kapara, that just like the sprinkling of the blood is one of the blood services, and it is critical to the atonement of the person. So avkol avoda umeakeves kapara, it has to be one of those four services that are critical to the atonement of the person. We said that burning fats is not critical to the atonement of the person. It might be that it's a service, and it might be that I have to burn the fats before I can eat the meat, but it's not a critical service to the atonement of the person. If I do those four services, and then I don't burn the meat, or I don't eat the meat, the person still has fulfilled his obligation to bring a sacrifice. Yatsu shvicha shiroim v'aktarsi murim, that's going to exclude the part where I pour the rest of the remaining blood out, or I burn the fats on the mizbeach, shein me'akvnes kapara. Those services don't hold back a person from receiving atonement. They're less critical. Okay, so it seems to imply in the brisa, these four thoughts are going to invalidate, right? With pigul, how did Rabbi Akiva say that they don't?
Sorry, I spaced out for a second. Okay, the consumption and the blood services. So four blood services: Zrika, Kabbalah,
Halacha,
right,
and Zrika.
Right. So those four, and then the consumption service, the fats, you would have assumed is a consumption service.
Because eating,
right,
burning on the mizbeach, I think pouring the blood down into the base of the mizbeach.
Right.
Right.
I was burning fats. I would have figured as well. But you're saying that.
But so again, it's burning. It's doing shchita for the sake of burning the fat outside of the right time. It's not burning the fat for the sake of eating it in the wrong time.
Right.
That's the difference. Okay. So now, how do you understand Rabbi Akiva? So the answer is lo kash. It's not a contradiction. Rabbi Akiva was talking about a circumstance where a person says, "I'm doing shchita in order to catch the blood tomorrow," however you would do that, right? You can't do that, but nevertheless, it's intent, right? It's intent. I'm slaughtering it now, I'm going to catch the blood tomorrow, okay? Now, that's not a pigul intent, because it's not one of the consumption services, right? And since you're having in mind about Kabbalah, that doesn't matter, right? The brisa here that's telling me that I can be liable for pigul by catching the blood is Da'amar Hareini Mekabel Dama. That's where I say, I am catching the blood, Almanas Lishpoch Shiraim Lamachar, where I'm going to pour the blood out tomorrow. Or not tomorrow, but in 3 days, right? Or tomorrow, right? Beyond the right amount of time, right? That's, right, because the blood can't be left over to tomorrow. That is pigul. So that's where the difference is. That's where Rabbi Akiva says, one place the machshava about Kabbalah doesn't matter, one place the machshava does, right? If I have shchita, or in order to think that Kabbalah, the zrika will be doing in proper time, that Rabbi Akiva seems to imply is yes, that will invalidate your korban. That's not pigul, but that's an invalidation of a korban, right? But it's not invalid if I think that I'm going to do the Kabbalah outside of the right time. Amar le'ahu mirabanan l'Rava. Okay, so the Rabbanan said to Rava, Ushvicha shiraim v'aktarsim murim lo pasla behu machshava. If what you're now saying is that these consumption services, not the blood services, these consumption services, the wrong intent doesn't ruin the korban, that's not. I'll show you a Mishnah. Mishnah says, Yachol lo tehei machshava mo'elas ela ba'achilas basar minayin l'rabos shvichas shiraim. I might think that as far as that intent goes, and I'm going to intentionally explain the Mishnah improperly for the moment because that's what the Gemara is doing, right? That I might think that having the wrong intent to eat, or the wrong intent while you're eating, creates pigul. But how do I note also if the wrong intent while you're spilling the blood also? Then right? It says the double language, meaning any consumption service. Any consumption service is going to create a problem with wrong intent. Whether that consumption is by a human being, i.e. eating it, or it's being consumed by the mizbeach, i.e. pouring the blood out in the base of the mizbeach. So lo kasha, not a problem, you're misunderstanding. One is pigul, is where you do one of the essential 4 services, sprinkling the blood, for example, with the intent to pour the blood out tomorrow, consumption service, that is pigul. The other is damar hareini shofech shirayim, where a person says, I am spilling the blood out, almanas lahaktir emurim l'machar, in order to burn the fats tomorrow. That is not pigul. Because that's where we said that the consumption service is different between consumption service and a kapara service. And so therefore, if you do a consumption service with the intent of doing the next consumption service outside of it, that's irrelevant, right? It has to be a blood, in order for it to be pigul, it has to be a blood service with the intent of a consumption service outside of the proper time. Good. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Brei de Rabbi Chia. Okay, Rabbi Yehuda says in Rabbi Chia, Shamanti shetvilas etzba mifagelas. You know what else I heard? When you're dealing with the inside korban chatos, part of the service, as we remember on Yom Kippur, is that the Kohen takes his finger and he dips it, and he starts to sprinkle it, achas, and then he sprinkles it, achas v'yachas, achas v'shtayim. He's got his finger and he dips it in. I heard that service, the dipping of the finger, is going to create pigul, because it's an essential blood service. Without doing that korban inner chatos is not valid. So therefore, if I have the wrong intent, I have in mind while I'm doing that this korban is going to be burnt in 3 days' time, right? That would be a pigul b'achshava, and it would ruin it.
Has there ever been a time where the Kohen had to throw the blood?
What do you mean by throw the blood? All korbanos get sprinkled on the mizbeach, so we call it throwing the blood. Yes. So therefore, this korban also, we call it sprinkling. It's throwing. He's basically the same thing, right? So now, this tvilas etzba mifagelas bechatos pnimis. This sprinkling of the blood, with the finger by the inner chatos, can create pigul. Shama Ilfa, so Ilfa heard this. Amra kame de Rav Pada. He said this in front of Rav Pada. Amar, he said, Klum lamanu pigul el mishlamim. Look, the source pasuk for pigul actually is talking about the korban shlamim. So now, why does the Torah tell us about pigul when it's talking about the korban shlamim? Because we're going to learn that the services that are applicable by a korban shlamim are those services that can create pigul. So now, ma shlamim ein tvilas etzba mifagelos behen. The korban shlamim has no finger dipping service. The korban shlamim is a straight outside on the mizbeach service. There's no finger sprinkling. So therefore, if you can't make pigul by dipping your finger in blood by the korban shlamim, afchatos ein tvilas etzba mifagelos behen. How can you possibly say then that the inner chatos, dipping your finger, is going to create pigul? It's not part of the korban shlamim, therefore it can't be a pigul issue. Now, what are you talking about? Are you saying everything? Whatever's in the shlamim, that's what's in pigul, that's the same thing? He says, look, there's another rule of pigul, which is that in order for something to become pigul, and you get your kares, and it's like the serious avera that pigul is, the rest of the korban has to be kosher. If you are doing an invalid service, let's say your animal had a mumu on it in the first place, right? And then you shecht it with the intent of eating it 3 days from now. That's not pigul, because the korban isn't kosher anyway. The korban has to be kosher in order for you to be violating pigul. If I have a korban shlamim, and I think that it should be done as a korban chatos, okay? That doesn't invalidate a korban shlamim, right? Therefore, if I bring the rest, I'm going to bring it the rest of the time as korban shlamim. That means the wrong intent. I bring my korban chatos and I make shlamim and I shecht it. This is going to be a chatos and I'm going to eat it in 3 days. That can be pigul because it's a korban shlamim. It's still fine. So what are you going to say? Af chatos shelo lishma ein motzi midei pigul. So what happens now? Now I take a korban chatos and I think this is my chatos. This is a shlamim. He thinks that it's going to be a shlamim, which invalidates the korban. But he thinks I'm going to eat it in 3 days. You're going to say, no, it has to be pigul anyway. Why? Because by a korban shlamim, that would be valid, and therefore it's still pigul. No, of course not. It invalidates. This is a korban chatos. It has different rules. Therefore, it can be invalidated differently. Therefore, the rule of pigul is going to apply to it differently. So how can you tell me that shlamim and everything that's in the chatos has to look like a shlamim? We know that's not true. It doesn't make sense in other places. Ela mayislech lemeimar meribuya de krok asya. He says, rather, what you are looking at here is that basically the rules of pigul come from the extrapolation of the pasuk. And then you apply it to each korban in the appropriate way. So therefore, if in the case of a chatos, I have a service that's critical, it's a critical blood service, then that could be a service that I can make that could be pigul, even if that actual service doesn't exist by a shlamim. That's what he says. Okay. Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi ba'aliyah. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said he was in this upper chamber area where they, some of these are famous stories of places that they were, these upper chambers where they were gathering in order to, we had discussed, I'm not sure which upper chamber story this could be, but we had upper chamber stories where they were hiding in order to intercalculate and add leap years. We had discussed one time. We had circumstances where they went to an upper chamber and Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel had votes. So usually it means that they are having some clandestine meeting or learning in private in some way. So he was in the Aliyah Zu Shamati. I heard like this: Shetvilas etzba mifagelas, that dipping the finger in the blood, that can create pigul. Tehiba Reb Shimon ben Lakish, and on that point, Reish Lakish said, Klum lomdu pigul ela mishlamim. Can't learn it other than from shlamim. Ma shlamim ein tvilas etzba mifagelas behind the same argument, right? Just like dipping the finger, there's no such thing. You can't make pigul by shlamim. So avchatos ein tvilas etzba mifagelas ben. So too cannot be the case by the korban chatos. V'chia kol mishlamim lamdu. Same argument. Basically, they had the same thing. But is that really true? You can only learn everything from the shlamim. Ima shlamim shelo lishman eino motzi b'dei pigul. If I bring my korban shlamim with the intent for a different korban, that doesn't invalidate my korban shlamim, and I still have pigul intent, that korban shlamim can stay pigul. So too by a chatos, if I have the wrong intention for a different korban, which does invalidate it, you're going to tell me it's still pigul? Of course not. It can't be pigul. It's an invalid korban. Amar Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina. So Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina said, in hakol mi shlamim lamdu. You're right. No, everything learns from shlamim. Ho v'chutz limikomo pasol b'shlamim v'shalo lishmo pasol b'chatos. He says, look, since, right, if I have intent for the wrong location, right, you're going to say that since the wrong location ruins a korban shlamim, shelo lishmo poso bechatos. So also the wrong, right, so he says basically, look, I've got some invalidators. If I have in mind to do the korban in the wrong location, that will invalidate my shlamim. Therefore, by a korban chatos, when I have intent for the wrong korban, which invalidates that offering, that is going to make it not pigul. In other words, it's a little different, but it's the same. Wrong, some kind of intent that ruins the korban is going to remove it from pigul. That's his point. Okay, but ma chutz lemekomo haposo b'shlamim motzid b'dei pigul, af shelo lishmo haposo b'chatos motzid b'dei pigul. So therefore, same thing, right? Whatever the rule is, just like having intent for the wrong location is going to remove it from pigul by a shlamim, because that's going to invalidate the offering. So too, having the wrong intention for a different korban is going to ruin it by a chatos. Therefore, pigul doesn't apply to it. Okay. Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah says, Mitzida tabra. He says, well, the problem with your analogy is right next to the connection. You're going to tell me that the wrong location is something I can learn out from that to other circumstances. But the wrong intent by a korban by having the wrong location in mind by a korban shlamim, you know why that invalidates the korban shlamim? Because it invalidates every offering. That is universal, and hence that problem is universal by all korbanos. That's why you can't have pigul applying to a korban that is invalidated through that. Tomar b'shalol lishmo, and you're going to say that a nullification by a korban chatos alone, like you have the wrong intent for a different sacrifice, sheino noegel b'pesach v'chatos belvad, those only apply to korban pesach and a korban chatos. How are you going to tell me that also removes it from pigul? Ella mayislach lememar. What are you going to say? How are you going to answer that? Davar apolso bahen motziam midei pigul. You have to interpret it as, it's not a matter of saying, hey, look, chutz l'makomo is the same thing. It's chutz l'makomo by a shlomim is the same as shalol lishma by a chatos. We actually have to look at it from the perspective of, no, this is puzzle, this is puzzle. So therefore, just like something that is puzzle by a shlomim removes it from pigul, something that's puzzle by a chatos removes it from pigul. Davar ma'akev b'hen mevin lidei pigul, something that is, therefore we're going to say the same thing by dipping the finger. Something that is a critical service of a korban is what can create pigul. So achanami, therefore, let's make the same application by the korban chatos. The dipping of the finger is critical to that korban, therefore, so davar ma'akev ba mevin lidei pigul, that also is going to bring it to pigul, right? If basically anything that's puzzle in any korban ruins it from pigul, despite the fact that each korban has its own rules as to what makes it puzzle, whatever is critical as part of a blood service for each korban, despite the fact that each korban has a different rule as far as what is critical, those differences are also going to be what brings it to pigul. And that is our conclusion. Amar of Mari. So therefore, dipping in the finger in the blood is going to, with the wrong intent for a consumption of Oda in the wrong time, is going to create pigul. Amar Rav Mari, Rav Mari says, Af anon nami tanino. We also can see that we see this in the Mishnah, right? I could prove this. Ze'akal, here's our rule. Kol ha'kometz v'nosein bekli, right? Any mincha offering, right? And it's made out of flour. I take the kmitza, take the scoop, right? And I put it in a service utensil. V'hamolich v'hamaktir, and then you carry it to the mizbeach, and then I burn it. So, okay. Bishlama kometz hainu shochet. Okay. All of those services, let's take a look. I understand why kmitza, right? Now, remember what the point here is. Pegel is written by a shlamim, which is an animal sacrifice. We are now suggesting that pegel applies to a korban mincha, to a flour offering. Well, how are you relating the two? Well, the answer is we know that each of the services by the mincha correspond to one of the blood services by an animal sacrifice. We don't know that yet, but we will know that. Shchita, slaughtering the animal, is comparable to the kmitza. That's where you take the scoop of flour out of the offering. So that's fine. I get it. So kmitza is going to become, I can have the wrong intent by kmitza, create pigul. Why? Because that is the same thing as shchita. So therefore that makes sense. That checks out. Molich hainu molich. Bringing the service utensil close to the mizbeach, I get that one too. Because bringing the blood in the utensil close to the mizbeach, those are parallel services. Maktir nami hainu zorek. Okay, burning the kmitza.
You didn't have to bring the blood to the...
That's Rabbi Shimon's opinion.
Oh.
Hang on, that says him, right. Remember, the Chachamim said that it is important, that is right, right? That you can do pigul, that you can have the wrong intent by all of those, right? Yeah. Okay. So, fine. How about burning the kmitza on the mizbeach? Well, that's the same thing as zrika. That's the same thing as sprinkling the blood on the side of the mizbeach. Elanosin bekli ma'nihu. But putting the kmitza, where the kohen scoops it and he puts it into a service utensil, where's that service? There's no corresponding. What about the fact that it's similar to Kabbalah, where I put the blood into the service utensil? Mi dami, that you can't compare those two, because hasam mi mela hacha ihu kashakil. One is the blood comes out of the animal and pours into the utensil. This one, the kohen is scooping and he puts it into a utensil. Those are not the same actions.
I mean, still receive.
Virami. So he says, okay, well, he says, Virami. So therefore, you're going to they're different. Ella. So rather, right? Kevan de lo sagi de lo yohiv al korchei avoda chashuvahi. Rather, we're going to presume. Here's why putting the blood in the service utensil is. It has nothing to do with Kabbalah at this point, right? As you say, yeah, but it's kind of the same anyway, right? Hang on to your answer, right? Assuming it's not, why is it that you can do pigul, that pigul intent ruins it? Because it's a service that's critical to that offering. It's essential to that offering. Since it's essential to that offering, That's why, so the Mishnah is proving our point about the sprinkling of the blood with the finger of the chatos. Since even though this is not the same as anything that happens in a shlamim, nevertheless, it's essential to that korban, therefore it can create pigul. So hachanami, kevin de lo sagi de lo avidle, since this is also avidla, sprinkling the finger is something you can't do this korban without, al korche, then it works. So he says, al korche hainu halacha. So therefore, it's going to fall into the category of holacha. That's what we're going to. How are we going to categorize? Basically, how are we going to categorize this sprinkling of the dipping your finger? It's going to be essentially an extension of the holacha, carrying the blood to the location in which it's being sprinkled. That's how we're going to put it as an extension of that. That's why it creates pigul.
But we said before that halacha, like carrying the blood wasn't. I thought it wasn't considered blood service.
Rabbi Shimon.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
We didn't get to Rabbi Shimon yet. We got the Gemara's going to come up and discuss it. All right?
You said before the
Yes.
we didn't do that. Was
What you're saying is
it wasn't necessary for all korbans, but now we're saying
that's Rabbi Shimon.
specific to that korban.
That's Rabbi Shimon, right? That is not us. That's not us, right? That is. I keep saying Rabbi Shimon. Make sure it is Rabbi Shimon, right? It's Rabbi Shimon, right?
Yes.
Rabbi Shimon. That's Rabbi Shimon's point of view. And what you're suggesting is, yes, Rabbi Shimon's argument would make this. Yes.
But that means that if we do for Rabbi Shimon, if Rabbi Shimon holds this,
Then Rabbi Shimon would say that sprinkling of the blood of your finger is not a. Now, also point out that Rabbi Shimon was talking about shalol lishma. He might say there's a difference when it comes to pigul and shalol lishma. I don't know that. I'm going to presume the answer is no. I think that he would be consistent. I think that sounds right to me. What we're saying is that Rabbi Shimon would say halacha is not a critical service and therefore unnecessary. You can't have an invalidating intent. Doesn't exist by it. Right? That is what we would say. And hence Rabbi Shimon would disagree with this Mishnah, which is okay, because he's a Tana. So he could disagree with the Mishnah. Right? This time, this Mishnah is all according to the Rabbanan. Okay. So now, he says no. Really, we like Brian's answer. He says, Liolam dedami lekabbalah. Putting the flour into the service utensil is similar to a service that is in the shlamim. That is, it's similar to Kabbalah. And which you said, Hacha mimela hasam ihu kashakil. You said it's a big difference. One, the blood pours in by itself. The other, you have to put it in. V'yav keven da'idi ve'idi maton klihu. He says, since at the end of the day, putting the material into the utensil, that's what Kabbalah is. Mali mimela, mali kashakil v'yahiv. What difference does it make if it comes in by itself or if you use your physical strength to put it in? It's too similar. That's why. So it doesn't really prove our point.
You got to be ABCD.
That's correct.
ABCD is,
How do you make the blood come out of itself?
When you cut the neck of an animal, it comes out.
It
Gushes out. That's correct. It's going. Okay. Lema kitanai. Okay. So let's say. Right? This issue, we're not done with this dipping the finger issue. Let's say it's a machlokas. Okay? Let's say it's a machlokas. Let's agree to disagree at the end of the day, right? Ditani. Chada tvilas etzma mifagelas bechatos. One says that the dipping of the finger by chatos creates pigul. V'tani idach. Another one says lo mifagelas. One says it does not. V'lo mispagelas. And if you have a intent about the dipping of the finger, that you're going to, as I'm doing my shechita, I will dip my finger tomorrow, right? So then that also isn't going to cause it to be pigul. My love tanaihi, so if I have one brisa that says one way, one says the other way, isn't it a machlokas tanayim? Lo. Nope, not a machlokas tanayim. It is like we've been predicting all along. It's ha-Rabbanan, ha-Rabbi Shimon. It's Rabbanan versus Rabbi Shimon. Right? It's not a machlokas within Rabbanan. This is the right. Now that we said it's halacha, it makes sense that this opinion, that Rabbi Shimon would agree that it's not that pigul is irrelevant to it. So he says, Rabbi Shimon, ma irya tevilas etzba. Why is he talking about dipping his finger? Why is that the issue? Kol she'eino hamizbeach hachitzon kishlamim ein bo bishum pigul. He should say, right? Any part of the korban chat, anything that is not similar to the outside korban, right? There should be no problem of pigul because you're not able. This is Rabbi Shimon's point. Was that Rabbi Shimon? Which Rabbi Shimon was this? Because we're going to say that since the source is from shlamim, so anything which is not like a korban shlamim doesn't create pigul, that means, hey, once you step foot into that Beis HaMikdash, all bets are off. Nothing counts as pigul anymore. Sprinkling doesn't count as pigul because that's not the way a korban shlamim is brought. So why'd you specifically pick on the dipping of the finger when everything else afterwards, which is dissimilar now because it's an internal korban, is not the same as a korban shlamim? All bets should be off. Ella, so rather hava harabanan. It's all within the shita of the Rabbanan, and lo kasha v'lo kasha, not a contradiction. Kan bechatos hachitzonos, kan bechatos hapnimios. He says there's a difference. One, the part where it says, where the blood, the finger is not going to create pigul. That's on the korbanos outside of the base, out in the outside in the courtyard, sprinkling it on the mizbeach, the chitzon. But when you're inside, and that finger is now critical. So that's where it is going to be pigul. So pshita, well, that seems to be very simple because lo ksiv behu v'taval. By the outside one, there is no service of dipping the finger. So obviously, if you dipped your finger in, it wouldn't create pigul because that's not even a thing to do. So itzrech, no, I need it because salko daitach amina, I would have thought to have said ho ksiv v'lakach. I would have thought, look, right? If you took the if the pasuk says, right, you shall take the blood, right? The pasuk says, the kohen is supposed to, even on the outside, he dips his finger, he takes the blood on his finger, and he wipes it onto the corner of the mizbeach. So, however, that service of dipping is not the critical part of the service in the same way as the kohen who dips his finger and does the sprinkling, right? It's not the same. So he says, well, but it is a little bit because let's say the pasuk says he has to take the blood. V'asi kof. Let's say a monkey came along, right? Right. Let's say a monkey comes along. Rami luhu ayodei, and a monkey takes the blood and puts it onto the kohen's hand. Well, the monkey in the Beis HaMikdash, but okay. Let's say it was done automated, right?
Monkeys have a brain like a human, so they can do whatever they need.
What would the kohen be able to do? Would the kohen be able to say, "Look, now I've got blood on my finger, I can just sprinkle it"? No. Boy lemishkol zimni achrisi. He's got to take blood himself. That's still, he's got to act. So it is. Keman dichsiv v'tavel dami. Even though actually dipping your finger in the blood is not a critical part of the service, getting the blood to your finger has to be done by a human being. So I might have thought that putting it onto the finger is part of the service and creates pigul, kamash mon. So therefore, that's what this comes to tell me. That although applying it to the mizbeach with your fingers and getting it onto your fingers has to be done by a human being, dipping your finger is not a critical part of the service. That's just something that you have to do in order to get to the next critical part of the service. Therefore, if you have the wrong intent while you're dipping your finger into it,
You're in trouble.
that is not going to create pigul. You're not in trouble, right? Whereas if you do it on the inside of the Beis HaMikdash, that is a critical part of the service because the pasuk specifically says the kohen shall dip his finger in and then sprinkle. Then that is critical. Lahachi lo ksiv v'tavel. That's the whole reason why the pasuk doesn't say and he will dip, even though he does need to dip his finger, right? It doesn't say to. The mashmachi to tell me that both of these things is true. You got to dip your finger in, but it's not a critical part of the service. Therefore, pigul doesn't apply to that dipping. Okay, now let's get into Rabbi Shimon. Now we love Rabbi Shimon here. Rabbi Shimon says, Rabbi Shimon machshir behiluch. Rabbi Shimon says, I don't have a problem with you having the wrong intention while you're carrying that blood. The korban's still kosher because it's not a critical service. I'm Rabbi Shimon Lakish. Rabbi Shimon Lakish, not to confuse with Rabbi Shimon in our Mishnah. Reish Lakish says, Moder Rabbi Shimon beholoches chatos hapnimius. Rabbi Shimon would agree when it comes to the korban chatos that's inside the Beis HaMikdash, shemachshava poselis, that the intent while carrying it is critical. Hoel va'avoda shein yachol lebatlo. You can't not do it. Why? Because the blood has to be, the korban is slaughtered here, and the blood is sprinkled here. How do you get it from here to here? It has to be carried. Therefore, it must be, according to Rabbi Shimon, since you can't avoid that holacha for him when it comes to the chatos that's inside, that is a critical service.
You need a vessel to bring it, to carry it from point A to point B.
So the Rabbi Shimon says,
that same argument would go back to the blood dipping the finger.
Oh, okay, good. Rabbi Shimon says, but wait a second. Kol she'eino mizbeach hachitzon kishlamim ein chayavin alav mishum pigol. He says, wait, his line of rationale is comparison. He says, wait a second, if it's not like a shlamim, so then, right, it doesn't carry over to pigul. So therefore, he doesn't worry about the unique characteristics of each korban. He doesn't care that this halacha is critical by the internal chatos. It's not part of most korbanos. Therefore, halacha is just not a service that matters as far as intention is concerned. Okay, you're right. You found one korban where it is critical that you do it, but since it's not done by most of them, then it's not critical. Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina says, Mordechai lifsol mikal v'chomer. He says, no. He would agree to invalidate it from a kal v'chomer because ma shelo lishmon shehuchsheru b'shlamim pasol b'chatos. He says, look, when it comes to a shlamim, right, if you have the wrong intent for the wrong korban, so that is kosher by a shlamim. But when it comes to a chatos, that's invalid. Chutz lizmano sheposel b'shlamim, having the wrong time, right, shechting by shlamim, thinking that I'm going to eat the korban at the wrong time, that does invalidate a shlamim. Eino din sheyifshol bechatos. So too, having, I will also say that should also invalidate by a korban chatos. That makes sense. The ashkechan chutz lizmano. So now that pigul intent by a chatos applies by having intent for consumption beyond the right time. Chutz mil komo minol, and how about having the wrong intent for the wrong place? So imi chutz lizmano, if you're going to say it's a kal v'chomer from having the wrong time, ma chutz lizmano shekin kares. Look, you get kares if you have a pigul intent. So therefore, that's a way worse than thinking I'm going to eat it in the outside of Yerushalayim, right? That's way worse. Imi shelo lishma, if you're going to tell me that I'm going to eat my I'm going to. It's that just like shlamim is outside it's not invalidated by the wrong. It's not invalidated by the wrong intent for the wrong korban, right? Shekei noeg bebama, but that is but shelo lishma is a critical problem when it comes to the olden days when people would bring korbanos outside of the Beis Hamikdash, right? Before there was a Beis Hamikdash, people could bring their korban on a bama. There was no such problem of slaughtering it or eating it in the wrong location, right, when you were in a bama, because you were allowed to bring it in the wrong location. But there was such an invalidation of the wrong korban, right? I can think for the wrong korban that would invalidate. So I can't suggest that I can learn from the fact that the wrong type of korban invalidates it, so therefore the wrong location invalidates it, because the wrong location might be less of an invalidator, because when it came to bamos, that wasn't a concern. So, shelo lishma ben mein noheg. So lo lishma, so the answer is, well, let's take a look. This issue, you took a look, you said, well, an invalidation of the wrong type of korban, what types of korbanos does that actually ruin? Noeg bepesach ubechatos. That is a korban pesach and a korban chatos. Pesach vechatos bebama lo karvu. You know what? Korban chatos and korban pesach were never allowed on a bama. Bamos were only personal korbanos that were brought as an ola or a shlamim. You could not bring a korban pesach on a bama. You could not bring a korban pesach. You could not bring a korban chatos on a bama. Therefore, interesting, right? Since there was never a circumstance where the wrong location was acceptable by those two korbanos, we can now make the extrapolation that also having the wrong location in mind would ruin those korbanos as well.
So the korban pesach was only brought when we had the Beis Hamikdash.
The korban pesach was brought even in the midbar, but there was always a mizbeach where we had to bring it. Right? Wherever that mizbeach, if the mizbeach was in Shiloh, that was the place to bring it, right?
Oh, so Shiloh wouldn't be considered though.
That was correct. The Shiloh would be the Makom HaMikdash. Correct.
Yeah.
That's not a bama.
Oh, okay.
Okay. The ibayis ema, or else if you want, I will say hekeshahu. No, I will tell you that actually you can learn from Sukkim why pigul applies. He says shlishi on the third day zechutz lizmano. Right. The pasuk says that if I have in mind to have consumption on the third day, that's outside of the proper location. Pigul, the location of, but pigul. Why does it say pigul then again? Pigul is having in mind to consume it after the third days. The word pigul in the pasuk is extra. It's in Inyan. It means eating it outside of the proper location. So, okay, we're at 10 o'clock. We're going to stop here, and we will pick up, and I will try to bring my Emir Tashem, I'll bring my model of the Beis Hamikdash for the next year, where it's a little bit more critical.
Which is in
This is going to be my sukkah.
Your sukkah. Okay, good.
On Motzei Yom Tov.